Hey y'all, and welcome to Politibrawl. My name is Brian, and Jamie Raskin opens up his mouth only to stick his foot squarely into it, and Harriet Hageman comes along to finish the job. Let's dive in.
What's going to be happening over the next 3.5 years is that people like Secretary Kennedy are going to be coming out with their rules and their regulations, and the courts are not going to be deferring to them, and they shouldn't be deferring to them if they operate in a realm of ambiguity within the statute. And so I just want everybody to be clear, you're committing yourselves with this vote to that position, that the courts should not be deferring to, Attorney General Bondi with respect to a DOJ regulation, or Secretary Kennedy with respect to an HHS regulation. It's going to be up to the courts. And I know a lot of you have been talking about impeaching federal judges because you don't like what they've been doing, and you haven't really bothered to say what's wrong with the legal analysis that is exercising you, but you still want them impeached. And you're moving in a very different direction now, and it's the direction I believe in, which is that the courts are the place where we go to find out what the law means. Like Marbury versus Madison said in 1803, it's emphatically the province and the duty of the Judicial Department to say what the law is. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add that point.
Thank the ranking member. The gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Well, I think we need to understand what Loper Bright did and what Chevron did, and we can do it by using some real-time examples. What the point of Chevron was if there was an alleged ambiguity in a statutory, in a bill, then they would defer to the agency's interpretation of what that statute meant, rather than going through the process of determining what the law is, which had been basically within their purview up until 1984. And so we got such incredible absurdities. For example, let's use the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act gives to the EPA jurisdiction over navigable waters of the United States. That is a specific term that throughout history we've known what it meant.
Great point.
But then all of a sudden, the EPA started interpreting navigable water of the United States to include mud puddles and irrigation ditches and water in borrow pits along highways and riffles of water in the sand out in the desert, and pretty much anything that you could think of that might not be in a plastic bottle like this. So the EPA, taking the phrase navigable water of the United States, which 90% of the people in this room would be able to define what a navigable water was, but apparently the experts, the EPA, the people who know this, the people who are the experts that courts should defer to, could not figure out that a man-made irrigation ditch is not a navigable water of the United States. So what Chevron did is it required the courts to defer to an absurd interpretation, and this is just one example of that. What Loper Bright did, that decision said it is up to the courts to determine what is meant by, quote, a navigable water of the United States. Now, that doesn't mean that the agencies don't weigh in. The agencies still file their briefs. They still make their arguments. They still have the U.S. attorney, the assistant U.S. attorneys appear before them and say a navigable water of the United States ought to be interpreted this way, or it ought to be interpreted this way. But what it also does is it made it so that everyday people could also go into that court and make their presentation and their arguments as to what a navigable water of the United States meant, and go back to the history of the Clean Water Act and why Congress never intended to include irrigation ditches, irrigation canals, borrow pits, mud puddles. The point of the Clean Water Act was for the federal government or the EPA to take jurisdiction over things like the Mississippi River, the Missouri River, the Colorado River, the Green River. But it sure wasn't to take jurisdiction over an irrigation ditch. It sure wasn't that was to be left to the states. Regulation of those kinds of water bodies are left to the states. Yet, because of Chevron, our courts allowed the EPA to take jurisdiction over things that Congress never, ever intended. The Loper Bright decision has correctly righted that wrong. And it doesn't mean that the agencies can't still make their arguments, can't still come in and bring in their expertise, can't still bring their expert witnesses to testify as to what these various terms should mean, but ultimately it is for the court to decide. And in light of the fact that we have had some bad decisions, such as the Chevron decision come out, it is time for Congress to act and say it isn't up to these so-called unelected bureaucrats, because that's exactly what they are, to be making the decisions about what the law says. That is for the courts to make that determination.
Very few things in my life give me greater joy than knowing that Jamie Raskin just got put in his place, and all because he is really exposing how terrified he and the Democrat Party are because of what has happened in the past 4 years, and arguably what happened in the past 8 years before Trump's first term during the Obama years. Remember when the IRS was directly targeted at conservative groups? Yeah, Barack Obama was directly behind that. After decades, the Chevron decision was basically an attempt to allow bureaucrats to take the place of Congress, and Congress has diminished in power ever since. So finally, the Supreme Court heard a case and said, wait a minute, if you are making a law that isn't actually written into law, then you, the bureaucrat, does not have the actual power. You do not have that power. And so it is now back up to Congress to correctly take a look at things and go, yeah, we actually need to do our jobs, and we'll write this law, which means that this policy has to be carried out. We'll write this law, which means this policy has to be carried out. That is the literal spirit of the Constitution, and that's a restoration of power, taking it away from the federal offices and the bureaucracy and putting it back into the hands of Congress, so they're the ones making the decision. Hey, y'all. Experts say they rig the markets, print the money, and manipulate the system. But here's the truth. They can't print gold. While the dollar weakens, physical gold and silver stay real, tangible, uncontrolled. When banks go digital and emergencies lock you out of your own funds, gold and silver won't need an internet connection or government permission. Their value is outside the system, a time-tested insurance policy against tyranny, inflation, and economic resets. So don't wait until the trap is sprung. Own what the elites hoard behind closed doors. Physical gold and silver off the grid, because when the system fails, real money talks. And to help you learn more about owning physical gold and silver, we have partnered with the great company Goldco, which supports this channel, which we deeply appreciate. So check out PolitibralGold.com for more info and see if you might even qualify for free silver. That's PolitibralGold.com. And I love what Harriet Hageman is using as an example. When the EPA then made this wild claim about navigable waters, what that did is that turned the entirety of the West, from the Great Basin to the Washington Desert to Idaho, basically the Rocky Mountains westward, now became an area of water wars waged by the federal government against ranchers, all under the guise of, well, the EPA ruled this, so sorry guys, your cattle can't drink from this. This is considered a navigable waterway, even though it's clearly an irrigation ditch that goes dry about half the time. You can't water your cows here. It became this giant power grab, and whenever you give the federal government the opportunity to be, well, opportunists, they're going to take it. After all, what is it that Rahm Emanuel used to say? Never let a good crisis go to waste. No wonder guys like Jamie Raskin are terrified. They think that the Republicans operate on the same basis that they do. Fortunately for Democrats, a lot of the old guard Republicans do not play this ugly tit-for-tat game, where if you come after one of my guys, we come after one of yours. The Republicans used to never play that game, and for a while, that meant that they had the high ground. But eventually, you lose one too many times. Eventually, you run into a set of politicians like Barack Obama who will weaponize power to an extreme, and there's nothing holding them back, particularly when it comes to those more, let's say, jellyfish-spined Republicans, kind of like Paul Ryan. And I used to love Paul Ryan. As a policy wonk, or at least policy wonk wannabe, I used to think Paul Ryan was the greatest thing since sliced bread. But he had to wheel and deal. He nickeled and dimed and tried to play ball with Barack Obama. But when you play ball with the Democrat Party, ever since they lost in 2000, they have not been okay. They have not been okay being outside of the realms of power. They looked at W and said, oh, this guy's terrible. He has no idea what he's doing. No, George W. Bush was a smart politician. Granted, when I say that, I really mean that Karl Rove and Dick Cheney were smart politicians, but at least Wyoming figured out that the Cheneys are no bueno and finally got the last of their stench out and got Harriet Hageman in. I love people like Hageman because she understands how the Constitution is supposed to work. And in this case, we now have the Constitution dictating that, yes, indeed, according to the Supreme Court, it's Congress that makes the laws, not some bureaucrat who's barely a GS7 level making a major policy change, all because they're a little bit higher up on the totem pole than I was when I was a park ranger. Make it make sense. But in the grand scheme of things, again, and I need to end on this note because I've been talking about it and got off on my own little rabbit trail. But Jamie Raskin is betraying the fear that, oh, they're about to do this to us. The old guard Republicans didn't used to do that, but MAGA, it is high time we start playing the game that we are. It's time to start playing the game in which we are in the arena, okay? We thought we were out here to play a good old-fashioned game of baseball. Nope, we're playing rugby, and we've been tackled one too many times. It's time to knuckle down. It's time to get in the scrum. And I know it's not an American sport, but rugby is amazing, and more Americans should be playing it. But it's time to knuckle down, spike the ball, pass it to one of the guys, and get into that end zone. We are no longer taking this kind of nonsense lying down. And once we've gotten the job done, once guys like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the MAGA movement, Make America Healthy Again, start setting policy that, yes, they are in their legal purview to do, and the Democrats are terrified that turnabout is fair play. It's yet to be determined which way it's going to go, whether it's the old guard, flimsy Republicans that don't like getting dirty, but the reality is we're in a mud pit now. And it's time to be slinging back. Before we can drag ourselves out, we've got to win this thing. And we've got to keep winning. And we've got to remember that at the core, the Constitution is clear. And the Supreme Court finally got it right. And Harriet Hageman pointed it out. And Jamie Raskin just can't avoid sticking his foot squarely in his mouth. I hope he at least washed it out this time. Folks, my name is Brian. Hope you enjoyed that segment here on Politibrawl. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Catch you on the next one. Until then, y'all have a good one.